EU5 is doing something special here, which I hadn't considered, which is they are expanding vertically in terms of each province. It's not just about the province itself, it's about who inhabits it, which different countries inhabit it, and that's very, very cool. Okay, chaps, I'm fresh off a cold shower. I had to take one because of this Tinto Talks. I usually don't cover this Tinto Talks, but this is something I need to. I'm very, very excited for this, and that's because we're talking about country types. Okay, so for those who don't know, Project Caesar, EU5, whatever you want to call it, very, very different from EU4, which I'm very excited about because I think it's important to establish itself as a completely separate game. Otherwise, we'll just be feeling like it's EU4, but with less content. And so with that, we start with country types here. So over here, you can see, and I'll just paraphrase all this for you because I know you're lazy like that. Basically, countries are based on owning land, but that's not what countries are about. The Treaty of Westphalia, to give some historical context, gave birth to this concept of a nation state as we know it today. Previously, nations weren't really nations. There was a general like cultural identity, I guess you could say, but that didn't really transfer over to nationalistic or national identity until, again, the Treaty of Westphalia, sort of 16th century, 16th, 17th century, that sort of thing. I think it was 1564, I think. Pretty sure still. But then you have this idea of dynasties. And so for me, seeing that they're moving more into this country type and playing around with the fabric of it, we saw them do this slightly with the Livonian Order in EU4 is great for me. So to start with, settled countries. So countries are based on only owning locations, which is pretty standard. That's the ones we've seen. So we can see own land, build buildings, have cause, raise armies. But then we deviate and we have army-based countries. Very excited for this. So the main differences here is that they have one, as you can see, one strong advantage and one disadvantage. Okay, advantage: you have an army, country exists, which means you don't need to own land. You don't need to, like, this is like not owning land in CK3 and still playing as a character kind of levels of hype. That's insane. The disadvantage is if you don't have an army, you don't have a nation. That's kind of the vibe, which is cool because over here you have the steppe hordes, which were very impactful. Let's not forget this is 1337. You have the Golden Horde. All this Russia region over here is still owing fealty over to it, but that's not the only kind of non-land based, what would you call it? Non-typical, I'll say, non-typical type of country. Over here you have extraterrestrial counties. So this is cool because it's like you have buildings on the provinces, right? So like it says here, banks, holy orders, and the Hanseatic League holdings. Now this in EU4 was always a bit of a weird one because you would have holy orders, for example, or banks were increased. Well, banks in particular were increasingly more powerful. Holy orders were starting to go on the way out, but they still had some holdings, but they didn't really feel how they should in EU4. CK3 does this really nicely with having them lease out holdings to you and that sort of thing. Whereas in this case, you need to keep positive relationship with the places your buildings in or you're not able to survive. But that does mean that you don't need to own the land. You can own buildings on the land in order to survive as an organization, but it still counts as a country, which is very, very cool. And you can see here we have banking countries. This is so cool. Again, main reason why I wanted to sort of show this off. So banking companies, we have Peruzzi and Bardi, and we have the Fuggers later on, very, very famous. And they can have main offices and start to take over the world financially. This is so cool because it means that you have, it's everything that people wanted from Victoria 3 and we're getting it in EU4 and EU5. So one main criticism of EU4 that people have had is that there's no sort of way to project soft power. There's this idea that like you can have little trade posts and little presences, you can offer out condottieri and you can subsidize, but let's say if you're Venice or Genoa, that's kind of the extent of it. Like that's the only nations in EU4 that kind of maybe feel like you're doing something like that and you can steer trade, but that doesn't really translate into something. So having the ability to transcend the sort of normal conquest loop of EU4, I think is very, very important for EU5. Oh, Project Caesar, my bad. I wonder if parents get upset if we use the wrong thing. Surely not, right? Anyway, so other countries can request loans from the banks and they can take over any estate loan that a country has and force the country to pay them instead. So you can sort of play this financial game. So you have the standard militaristic one and then you have this sort of double layer. What I would like to see is some nations just not care. Like imagine you're an army with a state kind of vibe, and then you have like these banking guys fighting desperately over your territory, and you don't care because you're just an army-based country, which is fantastic. So over here, you can have far lower interest rates on their estates, so they can easily become rich from other countries' debts, which is really, really cool, taking advantage of, for example, a massive war, England and France. They're duking it out. And then the banks are just sitting there making their money on the side. And so you kind of want to keep triggering wars, which would be very cool. So we have this advance over here, income from minting, total loan capacity, and unlocks takeover loan. Very cool indeed. Moving on from that, we have trade companies, which they're going to go over in later Tinto talks. I'll be curious to see how they're going to set this up. In my opinion, they need to set it up so it's a distinct entity that you are negotiating with, have the potential to sort of become at odds with to a degree. Maybe they want to start leaning towards independence. Maybe you want to start leaning over to taking them over. That's what happened to the East India Company. After all, it got incorporated and an Indian land got formalized as part of the British Empire and the British Raj. So I'm very intrigued to see where it's going to go with that. And to see how it impacts sort of the parent nation there. And that's during the Age of Reformation. So we'll see how far along in the game before we get to see those. Because it's kind of a thing, me and Hawk particularly were talking about this. We were a little bit concerned that as content creators, we might not be able to get into the meat of the game. Like there's going to be so many cool things like trade companies and colonization, which is synonymous, in my opinion, with the early modern era. This kind of time of exploration. And because we're starting 100 years earlier, does that mean we're going to have to be playing longer to get there? Which might not sound bad to you, but most people in EU4 play just the early game. They play the first 100 years. That's the most played. You will not find a single statistic to counter this. The most played time is the first 100 years. And so as content creators, we can set up a nation in the first 100 years and play kind of the most interesting time of EU4. And it means that we record for about 4 or 5 hours. I know Hawk records, for example, 6 hours to go a little bit further. And we can produce a video with that. Maybe this time we have to start recording 10-hour videos, and it might actually kind of start to take its toll on us. So we're excited for the game, kind of nervous about that. But still, back to EU5 and the Tinto talks. So very cool, holy orders, and again, this sucks. They're not giving us details about it, but the daimyos are using the building-based country mechanic. I don't know how that's going to work. Put in the comments if you think, because I'm baffled by that a little bit, to be honest. But building-based types of country, army-based types of country, and then standard ones, super, super cool. And now we have Society of Pops. This threw me a little bit as to how it would work in sort of the vision that I have of EU5, but still. So most mechanics are not available to them. They own no land, are entirely based upon the Pops associated with them. So over here you can see they don't have any buildings, they can't interact with RGOs, and they don't start with advances in taxation, laws, constructing cities. This is gonna be like your New World lot, right? So I think when I say I can't fathom how they would do this, is because I'm thinking in EU4 terms in terms of how they do tribes. So migratory tribes and natives and New World societies have always been something that EU4 struggled with. Like, how do you map that? We've had several iterations with Conquest of Paradise, where it's settled sort of like states with now like tribal land, and it's never really felt quite right as to how it's going to work. So hopefully this is a step in the right direction. So just to go over what they can do. So as you can see here, large groups of people live but on the fringe of more organized and advanced states. So the New World mixture of settled countries and Society of Pops. So it's those fringe guys that are most interested in here. They can migrate the Pops from one province to another over time. They can also force allegiance Pops and change them through warfare with another society. This seems like it has the most potential to break things, but I'm looking forward to see if they do it well. That's gonna be super, super cool. And this is great as well. The borders of different societies and even settled countries are extremely fluid, and they can be in the same locations, either of them. And again, it goes straight back to that theme of this whole video, this whole Tinto talks of the Treaty of Westphalia, the idea of nation state. And this is, for me at least, such an ambitious step, and I'm very excited for it. Obviously, there's gonna be a lot of emphasis placed on EU5. Nailing the feel of this sort of multi-layered, complex, not simulation, but like world, is going to be the key to like maintaining the dynamism that EU4 is known for. Having the sort of settled Pops, and then you have these kind of roaming society of Pops, and then on top of that you have the banking side of things, the holy orders. You have kind of in like EU5 is doing something special here, which I hadn't considered, which is they are expanding vertically in terms of each province. It's not just about the province itself, it's about who inhabits it, which different countries inhabit it, and that's very, very cool. So aside from what's going to attempt to settle this, achieve certain advances, as well as a settled country can sort of like do the whole forced migration thing that we see in EU4. And if they no longer own any pops, they'll no longer be an existing country. Makes sense. If they don't have any, if you are a land-based one, you don't have any land, you lose. If you are an army-based one, you don't have an army, you lose. If you have a building-based one, you don't have any buildings, you lose. Society-based one, you don't have a society. Guess what? You lose. So they're very likely to be AI only at release, which is kind of sad. It's the stated reasons because the gameplay experience is not where we want it. I think it's going to be similar to Decentralized Nations in Victoria 3. I think we're going to see a DLC focusing on this. I'm not mad that they're not going to be playable initially at release. I think that it's better for a DLC to be focused on it and for it not to be a... Look, ideally it would be a release, like immediately on release, this would just be available. The reality of the situation is there's only so much that can be worked on. And I feel like putting these guys in the game as a teaser, well, not a teaser, it was like as something that can function, but maybe doesn't function in the hands of a player, and then having a DLC focus on purely Society of Pops and then fleshing out that player experience, I think would be really great, because we've seen with EU4, the native experience isn't quite right. My experience with TV was miserable. Most people don't like playing as natives. Natives can sometimes be ridiculously overpowered and they require a lot of tweaking. So there is often times with grand strategy games that you'll see tools in the hands of an AI works okay. Tools in the hands of a player gets completely broken. Shout out Spiff. So finally here, the Society of Peoples in army-based countries can become settled through mechanics, but there are no other norm ways of changing country types except through special events. Very cool. So next week, there are going to be buildings you can build outside your country. It feels like there's so many layers to this, and the main reason, again, that I wanted to focus on this Tinto talk specifically is now we're starting to see complex interactions, not just within the country, but within countries within other countries. And if they get this right, it's going to be a beautiful mesh of the changing identity of nationhood at this time. And that's something that EU4 never really challenged. We have government reforms, which is a really, really cool addition, but we don't have this idea of you're not a nation at the start of the game. You are a horde. You are a dynasty. You're not really, like, a nation doesn't exist yet. And then you slowly build up the building blocks of your nation over time. The only way I can see this improved is if we have sort of that like dynamism. Right now we have it inbuilt with regards to extraterrestrial countries, or specifically army-based countries and Society of Pops, becoming settled countries. I would like to see the settled countries start to become more, I guess, like have more entrenched culture. And I don't mean culture in terms of just, the culture of the Pops, but like more entrenched ideals. Again, shades of the Livonian Order for EU4, like experimenting with that building blocks. Okay, we're confronted with this situation that has shaped our society such that now we're going to be focusing on this. EU4 simplifies all of this with national ideas, which is, if you think about it, a very reductive system because it sets you on a singular path. You don't have to, but it sets up your nation, the fabric of your nation. Like Prussia, when you form Prussia, you're immediately like a militaristic nation. You're the best at military, but why? That's just looking at the history of the nation from our point looking back, not at their point looking forward. And I feel like hopefully I'm getting my point across here, but it would be cool if nations had like national ideas and that sort of thing decided by their experience in the game with respect to their history. Because, you don't just pick up a nation. It's like civilization. You start at year zero. Like England should have a decent idea of a navy potentially. Portugal should be looking west. Like there are things that are integral to the people at the time, and then we take that basis and we move forwards. So for example, hordes should be combat focused, should be everything else. But maybe later on they become less combat focused. They become more focused on securing their trade and their like martial. It's quite a complex thing to do, but for me, they're looking at complexity and they're looking at how can we take this complex nature of this game that we want to create and make it into an enjoyable experience. Because at the end of the day, guys, a lot of people want to see EU5 be as complex as possible, and you can throw in mechanic after mechanic after mechanic. But if you stop people from playing the game, that's just not really what you want. The mechanic can be as complex as you like, but if no one's going to play it, it's not even a mechanic at that point. It's just a bit of code that no one touches. Anyway, that I feel like I'm ranting at this point. So that has been Tinto Talks number 26. This is something I really wanted to cover. And so, well, I have. And hopefully there'll be more to see in future. This is now getting to a point where I might start covering these more regularly because they're getting to, they're not showing maps now, which, don't get me wrong, I like maps. But now they're starting to get into the deep-rooted mechanics of the game. So if you do want to see more of this kind of content, make sure to like the video and subscribe. And I'll see you all next time. Goodbye.